Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says military confrontation between nuclear powers must be avoided. After warning about nuclear war, Russia says it will focus on building nuclear arms infrastructure in 2023. And Germany and Norway ask NATO to protect subsea infrastructure after the attacks on the Nord Stream pipeline. We begin from Russia, where its foreign minister Sergei Lavrov says it is vital to avoid any kind of military confrontation between nuclear powers, even if it only involved conventional weapons. Mr. Lavrov spoke to the participants of an educational program Dialogue for the Future in Moscow. Mr. Lavrov also said the West was pushing Ukraine to continue fighting against Russia.
I would like to remind that on the Russian incentive, presidents of Russia and USA, Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden, confirmed in June 2021 the so-called Reagan-Gorbachev formula that no one can be a winner in a nuclear war and that it may never be unleashed. Our position goes even further, meaning that besides acknowledging unacceptability of unleashing of a nuclear war, it is necessary to avoid any military clash between nuclear powers, even with the use of conventional weapons, because the escalation may become uncontrollable. And the fact that our Western colleagues are trying to withdraw from this part of the formula, that there must be no military clash between the nuclear powers, speaks for itself, including the line they must follow in respect of Ukraine. They are literally pushing Ukraine to continue the very war which the West is waging against the Russian Federation.
And Russia says it will pay special attention to building infrastructure for its nuclear forces in 2023. That's according to Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. In televised remarks, General Shoigu says Russia would also work to improve the combat capabilities of its missile forces and that facilities are being built to accommodate new missile systems. Russia has the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world, with close to 6,000 warheads. President Vladimir Putin has placed territory seized by Russia in Ukraine under Moscow's nuclear umbrella, warning that he's ready to defend Russia's territorial integrity by all available means.
During the special military operation in Ukraine, new combat methods of using missile troops and artillery are being tested. First of all, this concerns the use of reconnaissance and strike-fire systems, including unmanned aerial vehicles, and as well as modern and advanced weapons. At the present time, in 5 formations of the strategic missile forces, provisions have been made for the construction of infrastructure facilities for the deployment of new missile systems. When preparing the list of major construction facilities for 2023, special attention will be paid to construction in the interest of strategic nuclear forces.
And we're heavy on Russia today because its foreign ministry says Sweden and Finland joining NATO could accelerate the militarization of the Arctic region. Speaking at another briefing, spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said the 2 countries' accession to the alliance would mean a significant increase in tensions in the region. She says, quote, "It is impossible not to note that after these countries join the alliance, all the members of the Arctic Council will be NATO members except Russia. This could lead to an acceleration of militarization of the Arctic region, which would in turn mean a significant increase in tensions and pose security risks in the area." And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says Germany and Norway will jointly ask NATO to set up a coordination office to protect subsea infrastructure in light of the attacks on the Nord Stream gas pipeline network. In a briefing alongside Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, Mr. Scholz says no one should think that attacks on Europe's critical infrastructure should go unanswered. He adds that improved monitoring of subsea infrastructure, such as gas pipelines and telecom cables, will be discussed with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg later. Nord Stream 1 was shut down for repairs on August the 31st, but never restarted and was subsequently damaged by explosions in September. Nord Stream AG, the operator of the Russia-led Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline, updated the end date of the unplanned outage at the Greifswald exit in Germany to April the 1st, 2023. Local authorities say a Russian strike on a gas pipe left dozens of local residents without gas in the village of Zaporizhzhia region, in a village in the Zaporizhzhia region. The regional governor, Alexander Staruk, wrote on his Telegram channel that a gas distribution point in the village of Komishevawa, says to the east of the city of Zaporizhzhia, was heavily damaged and a fire started. A crater was seen in front of the damaged point, with more damage reported across the residential area, which is some 30 kilometers from the front line in Zaporizhzhia. Russia claims to have annexed the Zaporizhzhia region along with Donetsk, Luhansk and Kherson regions after holding what it called referendums condemned as a sham by Kiev and the West. NATO foreign ministers seek to reassure fragile countries in Russia's neighborhood that it could be destabilized by Russia as the conflict in Ukraine drags on, squeezing energy supplies and pushing up prices. The European leaders worry that countries on the continent's southern and eastern fringes will lose patience waiting for membership of the European Union and NATO, leaving them open to Russian and Chinese efforts to gain influence and vulnerable to instability.
To protect all the countries in the Western Balkans and close to Ukraine, because it's important in this moment to work all together. The unity is the most important point for everybody. It's a strong message to Russia. On the Western Balkans, it's important to be more present in this region. Last week I was in Serbia and Kosovo for achieving a good solution between these two countries. The stability on the Western Balkans is important for peace, also for stopping the illegal immigration in the Western Balkans. Are crucial. Also, we need to stop the Russians also in the Western Balkans. We need more Europe in the Western Balkans. This is the new Italian strategy, to be more present in the Western Balkans.
Second precondition to new European security architecture is, and this is, I think, also today a main message to partners, Moldova, Georgia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, that Russia should not, after the war, after the Ukrainian victory, have no chance to dictate security options and a way of life to its neighbors.
It's first time that we have been invited to NATO summit. It is very important considering situation in Western Balkan and actually current moment we are facing due to aggression of Russia on Ukraine. So Western Balkan, and in particular Bosnia and Herzegovina, is very concerned about the future and about that what it might mean for my country, since we are after election in process of formation of government, and as you most probably know, we have a proxies, or we had a proxies in our government, Russian proxies. So division in the country is deep, and we hope that we'll be able to overcome it. NATO presence is extremely important for Bosnia and Herzegovina because it is guarantor of our security.
Let's talk now to Dennis Riva, researcher, Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria, South Africa. Nice to see you again, Dennis. Morning.
Good morning. Good to be back.
It was celebrated, but it was a grim anniversary. I believe the pronunciation is Holodomor, the anniversary of what was termed genocide against the people who are now Ukrainians way back, some 90 years ago. And this had to do with food, the collectivization efforts of the then Soviet Union. And that led to almost 10 million Cossacks, as they were then known, who lost their lives because they were opposed to this. And it was all about food. Now, on the anniversary this year, Ukraine made a great deal of emphasis about making sure that that didn't happen again with a positive message, which was that countries, particularly on the African continent, who traditionally suffer food shortages, would not do so if Ukraine was able to send them food. What do you think is behind this strategy?
Well, it's actually quite an interesting initiative. So it was launched, I believe, this month on the 90 years anniversary, as you mentioned. And the idea behind this initiative is simple but quite effective. So essentially, you have Western donors, so rich countries, purchasing grain from Ukraine and then donating this grain to some of the less fortunate and more at-risk countries, including in Africa, especially in Africa. Obviously, the goal behind it is humanitarian. Because of the war in Ukraine, one of the unintended, but also, I guess, intended results of Russia blockading the Ukrainian grain in the ports was that the prices of food and prices of grain have increased, which meant that a lot of the vulnerable countries in Africa were no longer able to outcompete with other countries for the purchase of grain, because it is a business. So this initiative would ensure that some of the African countries, Sudan, namely Somalia, Ethiopia, would be guaranteed to receive food from Ukraine, and that would go a long way to ensure that food shortages will be addressed. Now, the humanitarian side is important. We've seen the first ship funded by Germany leaving the port towards Ethiopia, and I believe there are a number of other ships that are due to leave the ports towards Sudan, Yemen, and Somalia. But another side of this is obviously this is a massive diplomatic victory for Ukraine. We know, and we've, I believe, discussed it before in this program as well, that Russia attempted to use food shortages and food insecurity to put pressure on African countries to basically demand the end of the war. Now, what will happen now is there is this process, the process of grain sales becomes transparent. So now it is no longer about food supply from Ukraine. It is about food supply from Ukraine to a specific country. So now if Russia attempts to disrupt the food supply as it has done before, it will drag into this conflict new countries. So it makes the conflict more personal for African states. And I believe Nigeria is one of the countries that was also listed among the beneficiaries of this program. And I think this is a smart move. I think this will ensure that it is less likely that Russia will opt out of the grain deal as they've done before. And that may ensure that we will have a more stable food supply coming year.
I agree with you. Of course, Nigeria is one of the listed countries to benefit from this initiative. I believe about $50 million have been raised in support of the initiative to date, with more expected, because those grains may be free to the countries who are beneficiaries, but someone has to pay for them. So that money has to be raised to ensure that these payments are done. But do you think that Ukraine strategically, I know you mentioned the diplomatic side of it, but that strategically it came to the party a bit late, because in many African countries, Russia is fairly entrenched. In some places, they have troops on the ground fighting in internal wars of those countries in Mali, Central African Republic, and a couple of other places like that. The Wagner Group is very, very active. And then in other places, they have projects that they're maintaining and so on. But only this year would we say that Ukraine made a big splash with the visit of Dmytro Kuleba. But that was after Sergei Lavrov came to the continent. And as you said, there was a narrative that was put out by the Russians at the time. Do you think the Ukrainians perhaps may find it a bit difficult to change minds in many of the places where Russia is fairly entrenched?
No, this is a very good point. I think it's fair to say that Ukraine, for the very long time, has not been present in Africa, and Africa did not feature high in terms of the priorities of the Ukrainian government. Ukraine only has a handful of embassies across Africa. Its presence is almost non-existent. But at the same time, and you rightfully pointed out that Russia has actively established itself on the African continent. They've started re-engaging with Africa around the year 2000 when Putin came back to power, and especially after 2014 when they were faced with the first wave of sanctions after the annexation of Crimea. Russia realized that it needs allies, and it started really engaging closely with their counterparts. I agree that it will be an uphill battle for Ukraine. Russia has established itself quite well and aligned itself quite well in Africa, but at the same time, I think that it's a good starting point to have these discussions. We remember that previously, when the question of food shortages in Africa were raised, a lot of African countries who took a neutral position in the war actually were convinced by Russian arguments that it is Ukraine's fault or Ukraine is at fault. A lot of the African leaders attended the Sochi summit, the Africa-Russia Sochi summit this year. And one of the narratives that was pushed by Russia is that the reason why you don't have food is because of Ukraine. So this initiative would actually go a long way to actually promote the Ukrainian narrative, promote the different side, and counter the Russian narrative in that regard. And I think it's a good first step. And hopefully more steps will follow if Ukraine continues to engage in a productive and constructive way and engage with African countries in terms of their interests and their needs. I think we may see some sort of payback, definitely. Not across the board, but it's an opportunity for Ukraine to actually also start the good relationship with Africa.
Let me take you away from the Africa and from Africa issues and the grain initiative now, and go to the main conflict itself. Ukraine has survived so far. I think there's a consensus around that point. Ukraine has survived the onslaught of Russia primarily due to the support of Western powers, particularly NATO and the European Union, both in terms of armaments and money directly. But that has fostered some level of solidarity on the Ukrainian conflict. But on this issue of energy prices, the price caps, and so on, there continues to be some level of divergence. The richest country in Europe is Germany, and without telling any of the others, Germany produced its own program to protect its own citizens and its own businesses. That didn't go down well with many of the others who aren't quite so rich and who might not have been able to afford that kind of program. Do you think, especially because we are going into winter now, this issue could prove to be some kind of straw that broke the camel's back in terms of the unity that Europe has been able to display down the last 9 months?
This is a very pertinent issue. You rightly pointed out to the way Germany acted that resulted in a lot of pushback from other members, especially France, but also the smaller countries. The challenge is there, and the challenge is, of course, that European Union has grown significantly from what it used to be, roughly uniting Western European countries, to now include Central and Eastern Europe, and the interests and the values across the European Union are not necessarily unilateral, which creates a lot of tension. We've also heard recently that a number of EU member states have come against allowing Romania and Bulgaria joining the customs union that they have, the free travel agreement that they have. So there is certainly tensions within the EU between some of the traditional partners, but also between the Western Europe and the Central Europe and the Eastern Europe. However, I don't think that it will necessarily result in sort of the support for Ukraine ceasing. We've seen a number of positive signs coming out of Germany as well. We heard recently former Prime Minister Boris Johnson made a few very unflattering comments about the way some of the partners reacted to the war breaking out in Ukraine. And he mentioned specifically that Germany would favor a quick victory of Russia if the war were to break out. And we saw this certainly reflect in the way Germany dealt with Ukraine in the first days of the war, essentially rejecting any calls for aid or military support. But we're seeing this changing all the time. And we're seeing more and more a growing understanding that this issue is not going away. And it's not just about Ukraine. I mean, if Russia were to be victorious, if Russia were to win the war in Ukraine, the next question will be, what will happen to the Baltic states? There's a lot of tension between the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Russia. What will happen between Russia and Poland? There are a lot of tensions in that regard as well. So there is certainly a degree of understanding that it is in the common interest of European countries to support and to continue to support Ukraine, and the consequences of letting Russia win in Ukraine may be detrimental. They may be really damaging for European countries and their security and their economic security. And I think this understanding will ensure that Ukraine continues to receive support.
Indeed, I'm sure the Ukrainians would be hoping that you're right. Denis River, thank you so much for your time, and do stay well, my friend.
Thank you.
Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev says self-censorship from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen after she deleted a tweet which mentioned Ukrainian casualties is, quote, humiliating. He added that the climb down showed the bloc is nothing but a U.S. puppet. Mr. Medvedev said in a post that, quote, it is obvious that Aunt Ursula was slapped upside the head by her bosses in Washington. Seemed to hurt too. It looks extremely humiliating. The president of the EU executive body had claimed in a speech that 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers had died in the fighting so far, along with 20,000 civilians. But soon afterwards, the tweet about it on von der Leyen's account vanished. The reference was also removed from the transcript of the speech on the European Commission's website and edited out of the video the EC shared on social media. Meanwhile, Russians visited H&M's flagship Moscow store for the last time yesterday before the world's #2 fashion retailer closes all its stores in Russia for good after a stock sale that lasted about 4 months. H&M shut its doors soon after Russia sent thousands of troops into Ukraine before reopening to snaking queues of people in August to sell surplus inventory. The crowds were not so large on the final day, but those who made the effort were rewarded with fully stocked shelves and 50% off everything. Companies have come under public and political pressure not to do business with Russia, with many foreign outlets hurriedly suspending operations soon after the troops went in, although not necessarily announcing a permanent exit. H&M took a $2.1 billion, that's about $200 million hit, in the third quarter for winding down its business in Russia. The Swedish firm became the first big European retailer to start layoffs, announcing 1,500 job cuts yesterday due to softening demand as consumers grapple with soaring inflation. And Russia's foreign ministry says a proposal by Western countries to introduce a cap on the price of Russian oil was, quote, an anti-market measure that would disrupt supply chains and worsen the situation on global energy markets. The foreign ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, said, quote, we have repeatedly said that the introduction of the so-called ceiling on Russian oil prices is not just a non-market mechanism, it is an anti-market measure. She added that Russia would not supply oil to countries imposing a cap. Let's talk to Laddie Williams, of course, when we hear oil and price caps and so on. We can almost guess that that's what's coming next. Morning, Laddie.
Morning.
We talked about the oil caps yesterday, but today, the Russian economy, in spite of all their efforts and everything they've done over the last 9 months, has shrunk.
Yeah. About 1.7%, in the month from January to September. Well, it is expected.
Not really a surprise.
Not really a surprise because, it's a heavily, sanctioned economy, right now. But some analysts are saying it has, still the sanctions better than expected because we got that projection there that the economy would contract by about 12%. That's talking about GDP, but we're seeing the economy ministry in Russia saying they're expecting about 2.5%. So it's a far cry, but it is expected that they would say that. But now we're seeing this price cap issue coming to the fore now. If it actually does happen, count down to December 5th, get that decision. If it does happen, then we can expect, more shrinking for the Russian economy because at the end of the day, countries that impose that cap will not be sold to. So that would reduce, revenue.
And introduce, as the foreign ministry spokeswoman said, introduce supply chain disruptions.
Disruptions again. So it's a tough balance, to make at this time. But they have to, make a decision. If not, it will just be a complete outright ban, by the EU, which is even a more drastic
measure to take, and will have even more
effects, on the global economy. So we're still watching out for it. But on the flip side, we saw, capital investment actually rise by 5.9% in Russia, which is, a good sign.
Which seems to be against the run of play, as it were.
So that's quite interesting, that's happening. So that's helping to, even spur the economy even more. But, they still have to deal with, real wage, reduction, rising inflation, and all other economic headwinds still, biting them at this time. We know they're not getting, those critical inputs for their manufacturing because of these sanctions. So they're holding up well, but at the end of the day, time will tell.
Yeah, indeed. Yesterday, you alluded to this yesterday. Yeah. You said it. You said, well, we'll be waiting to see. The most powerful banker in the world, Jerome Powell, was expected to talk. Now he's talked.
He has spoken.
And he said, smaller interest rates rises may start in December. How does that play?
It was, expected. But, some are interpreting what he said, differently. Some see a dovish comment there. Others are saying, oh, my God, that was so hawkish. But at the end of the day, the market, reacted positively to that because any, as long as it's not a 75 basis points, it's less than 75 basis points, then it's a good thing. That's how the market is interpreting at this time. Right. But, he did say, the fight against inflation right now is largely inadequate. Saying that, they're not out of the woods yet, even though they saw that deceleration, they will still have to, do more monetary tightening, going forward. But he did also say, in the same breath that, for the December meeting, we could expect a less, aggressive rate hike. So we saw the markets, react to that, comment, and we saw the NASDAQ jump about 4%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, that also closed, in the green yesterday. And we also see, Bitcoin this morning, that's above $17,000.
So relief all round.
Relief all round, basically. And we saw markets in Europe and Asia also, react positively to this. But at the end of the day, when that meeting comes, we'll see.
Yeah, the plans again, all hearts will come together again.
Exactly, yeah. So it's still volatility we're expecting, in this markets because at the end of the day, inflation is still elevated. They still have that target of 2% to get to, which seems really far, right now.
And difficult to attain.
And really. Difficult to attain. So we'll still keep watching, but I don't think the market's out of the woods yet.
More good news, the Eurozone inflation rate dropped for the first time in about a year and a half.
Yeah. So
what's responsible for that?
It's another good news. We saw the US inflation also decelerate. Now we're seeing Eurozone inflation also decelerate. Good news, signs that inflation might be peaking.
Right.
But the one we saw for November is just because of the rate of energy price rises actually
drew back
a bit. So that helped to also pull back the inflation rate for the month. So at the end of the day, they still have a lot to do, to make sure those energy prices keep coming down. We're seeing the interventions they're trying to propose, but we also see them trying to also cap, Russian oil prices, which could, backfire, at the same time. So it's good news, but they're still not out of the woods. But it could also help the ECB actually also pull back on
in terms of the rate hikes. That was what I was waiting for you to say.
So it's good news also, but at the end of the day, most of these economies know they are not out of the woods.
Yet, and therefore they will still be quite. They'll tend towards being hawkish as opposed to being dovish.
Yeah.
Indeed. All right then, Ladi, thanks. Of course, I didn't take up Ladi on how the markets are looking. If you want to know how the markets are looking, do watch out for Business Morning right after this show.
Right.
Ladi will be there with the crew. And then, of course, Business Incorporated later. Thanks, Ladi.
Thank you.
Let's look at some other news now. A statement released by Spain's foreign ministry says the envelope that exploded at the Ukrainian embassy in Madrid yesterday was addressed to Ambassador Sergei Porotlesev. Spain's foreign minister, Jose Manuel Alvarez, spoke to Mr. Porotlesev after the incident. According to the same statement, the person injured was a Ukrainian worker. Mr. Alvarez, who is visiting Spanish troops at a NATO mission in Romania, extended his support and solidarity after the incident. And U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that NATO is looking to invest its Soviet-era weapon systems used in Ukraine. Mr. Blinken made this statement in Bucharest, Romania, while attending a meeting of NATO foreign ministers, where he added, quote, "We're looking at every option to make sure that the Ukrainians get what they need and what can be most effective for them. Some of that does go to Soviet-era systems that they've had in their inventory for decades, and, for example, making sure that the ammunition is there for those systems. And in some cases, that may require producing things that haven't been produced for some time." NATO was discussing investing in old factories in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Bulgaria to restart the manufacturing of Soviet-era shells for Ukraine's still largely Soviet-era artillery armory.
We're also working to...
And European energy companies urged to donate equipment to Ukraine to repair energy grids. They are being asked to donate essential equipment to Ukraine to help repair the grid that has been damaged by Russia's invasion. The leading international energy organization coordinating such efforts has said. In a statement, the energy community said it had been assisting Ukraine by coordinating donations of specialized equipment to repair the infrastructure damaged in attacks by Russia. The International Energy Organization said its primary mandate is to help Ukraine and other countries in the European Union region to reform their energy sectors. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko is planning to install a Christmas tree of, quote, invincibility in the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. The tree is said to be 12 meters high and decorated with energy-saving lights that will be generator-powered. According to Mr. Klitschko's social media post, a charging point will be installed near the generator for people to charge their phones, and once Christmas passes, the company that provided the generator will donate it to the Ukrainian armed forces. The tree itself will be placed on St. Sophia Square, and the decorations will be funded 100% by local businesses. Mr. Klitschko described the tree as being decorated the same as previous years, which includes 1,000 toys, blue and yellow bubbles, and 5,000 white doves donated by Global Decor. The top-up, patriotically, will be a Ukrainian coat of arms. The spruce will be decorated with a nod to the international assistance that Ukraine has received. Flags of countries that help Kiev cope with challenges and consequences of the war will be placed around the base. Mr. Klitschko had announced earlier that trees would be installed right across the city of Kiev, but they didn't offer many details, saying we cannot let Putin steal our Christmas. It was confirmed that any tree installations would not have mains-powered lights, given the pressure on the Ukrainian grid. The use of the generator appears to be an alternative. Let's now speak to the Chairman Guild of Public Affairs Analysts, Enugu State Chapter. Ambrose Igbokwe joins us via Zoom from Enugu. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time. Trust that the connections are much smoother this time.
Good morning. I think it is. You know, when you were talking, I was thinking that.
Oh dear.
And while at the time of peace in Nigeria, we are powering everything with generator.
Yes, and of course that is coming as something that is unique to the Ukrainians. So I guess they are beginning to get to where we are already and where we have been for some time.
Exactly.
Let me begin our discussion with you from the grain initiative, which I discussed with my first guest and which Ukraine is promoting now. It's getting donations from other countries to get resources to send ships to specific African countries like Sudan, Somalia, Ethiopia. Nigeria is also on that list of beneficiaries. It will be free to those countries because the grain will be paid for by the donations from these other countries. It is a humanitarian, but of course it is also a diplomatic initiative designed to garner support. Do you think it's coming a little too late?
It is a Greek gift.
Why do you say that?
Ukraine is in war. Ukraine is in war. We should be helping Ukraine. We should be, you know, the people sending aid to Ukraine to support them in the war. Now, paradoxically or ironically, it is the other way around. Ukraine is sending grain to us free of charge. Mind you, laddie, there is nothing in international diplomacy that is free. Anything that is tagged free is free in quotes. It comes with so much underlying trap that is not usually exposed at this time. So it comes as if it is, why will Ukraine, that is in war, send free grains to Africa, including Nigeria? So the question Africa should be asking and should be interrogating now is, what does Ukraine stand to gain from this initiative? In terms of the diplomat, what are they asking in return? There's nothing that is free. And that is why African leaders perplex me. Over the years, they know this, that when they say AIDS and all those, nothing is free. So when Ukraine, who is at war, that needs all the help, Ukraine is, other countries are sending technical aid, funding, all kinds of support to Ukraine. The same Ukraine is now sending free grains to us. So what we should start interrogating right now as Africans, and why Africa? You know, there's this, what I call it, international diplomatic insults that usually meted out to the continent of Africa. And Africans just lap it up and swallow it. So why Africa? What is the underlying you know, kickback that they are getting from this? Because when Ukraine sends grain, they say it's for diplomatic reasons. What are those diplomatic measures they are containing? Are they trying to extract mineral resources from Africa to form their... There's a crisis of energy. They are having a short supply of gas and petroleum from Russia. Is this tit for tat? Is this an exchange for our oil and our gas? Because these countries that are sending to have reserves of gas, have reserves of oil. Is it also in terms of military support?
There seems to be a conspiracy of some sorts against our conversation this morning.
I was just about saying that.
But I was before we were cut off, I was asking if you thought, as a diplomatic point, this issue of Africa supporting Ukraine, because as you said, it's not for free. The grain is coming in return. The Ukrainians want support from Africa against Russia. But then Russia is fairly well entrenched in Africa already. There are countries where Russia is building things, where they are fighting on behalf of the country's armed forces and all of that. So I'm wondering if this effort is going to gain much traction. Is it too little, too late?
Well, I would just say it's just too selfish, because Ukraine has been there for over the years, so many years. And the Soviet Union, which Ukraine was part of, was very entrenched in Africa, as we have said. Remember, it was the Soviet Union that built the Jakarta steel plant, that built the DSC steel plant in Onya and Laja, that built the National Theatre, that built so many things in Nigeria. Murtala Obasanjo regime was Soviet prone. And so many Africans. So you are right, they're entrenched. A lot of our technical expertise was got from Russia, Soviet Union in those days. Now, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1990-91, now it is like 30 years, and Ukraine stood aloof. Ukraine had no regard for Africa. They didn't need us. They were pretty okay where they were. All of a sudden, their big brother, Russia, invades them, and then they start scrambling to Africa and asking for support from Africa. And then, instead of doing it in terms of technical expertise, like what Russia did, bringing expertise to train Africans in some certain technologies, in some other ways, what are they doing? They are giving us feeding bottle food. Oh, come take grain so that we can get your support. So it is still, I think it's insulting. It's an insult by Ukraine to come to Africa and say, oh, take food so that you can support us. What happens to technology transfer? What happens to building other aspects in terms of expertise for the African countries and their citizens? But they are throwing grains at us, and even they don't even have the financial resources because of the war to buy the grain. They are bringing other countries donate grain to us so that we can ship it to Africa. So they are behaving as a Father Christmas kind of status and trying to gift us something for Christmas. That is an insult. I think African leaders should reject that kind of insult. You are begging us for your support when you need it, and yet the only way you know to get it is to throw some food at us and say, come take it. So I don't think this is right for Africa, and Africa should collectively reject such insults in this time.
Indeed. Let me take you to the conflict itself now. I mean, the Grain Initiative and all that are side events to the main conflict itself. The last time we were trying to speak, we were trying to examine what the impact of winter, the winter which is now on ground and is extremely harsh in the theater of conflict, would have on the possibilities of the conflict continuing, at least during this period, and then whether that would provide a window of opportunity for some kind of peace talks or negotiations to take place. I mean, if the fighting is not going on, then some other things are should be going on. The Pope had offered to mediate, just as he was just the latest and probably the only person who was not previously involved in this conflict directly in terms of mediation, has offered his good offices to mediate. Do you think that has any traction either, that anybody is going to be willing to listen to the Pope or allow the Pope to intervene at this point, 9 months into the conflict?
Well, the Pope is a powerful voice in the world, but the majority of the Catholics and Christians in Ukraine and Russia are not directly under the Pope. They are the traditional Catholic institution, Orthodox Catholic churches. They have their own patriarchs and the rest. So the impact of the Pope may be very minimal, because if it was countries that are under the Roman Catholic rite, perhaps there are more direct intervention and direct impact the Pope could give. But all the same, the Pope is a global figure, he's an ambassador of peace, and is well respected. Let's hope that he will have something, his intervention will have some impact. But Ladi, I would rather say that even in wars, there are what we call safe corridors. There are different approaches in war to allow for humanitarian services during war. That's why they open safe corridors. That is why they allow people like humanitarian services like Red Cross, Caritas, and some other people to fly in, to give food aid and other things to the poor, medicine and other things. So let the winter be treated as such. Even if we have not been able to get a kind of mediation, a kind of solution that will stay the war, let us create for this winter, let them be able to create a kind of safe corridor to say, okay, let's supply the gas needs, let's have the energy needs for heater to heat up the system in terms of to provide heating systems for the winter. In this way, whether the war continues or whether the war has stopped, people will not die from cold, because the consequences of people dying from cold may even be more devastating than people who are dying from rocket launchers and shelling. And that is the greatest tragedy here. And the casualties will be downplayed by both sides. That is the problem. We are talking about human lives here, but we are treating it as figures, as casualties, as flexing of muscles and all those things. So this is the time to negotiate a kind of an armistice to say, let us cease the war for this winter period, especially this critical period of winter, and let's supply the needs that is needed for now. Then after that, if they want to continue the war in the intensity they have it now, they can. Or they want to end the war, they will. But ultimately, I will reiterate that the greatest losers of this war is not the United States, it's not NATO, it's not EU. The greatest losers are Ukrainians and Russians, and they are brothers. So those other people contributing to the war are outsiders. So it is time for them to sit down as brothers to and I call this fratricidal war. It is purely a fratricidal war that is being fueled by other external bodies. So it is time for them to stay, because the people that will die in winter are Russians and Ukrainians. The people that will die in the shellings are Russians and Ukrainians.
Indeed. I hope the light people are listening. Ambrose Igboke, Chairman, Guild of Public Affairs Analysts, Enugu State Chapter. Thank you for your time this morning, and Happy New Month. It's the first day of December.
It's scary to know that Christmas is a few days away.
Indeed, it can be scary. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me today.
Finally, on the program, Ukrainian soldiers serving in the country's eastern Donbass have received winter clothing and sleeping bags as temperatures have started falling below 0 degrees Celsius. Soldiers that spent the night in barracks in an undisclosed location in the eastern region said that their unit's command is handing out winter jackets, boots, sleeping bags, and other weatherproof equipment. One serviceman, the 39-year-old Astor, said he had already been given weatherproof equipment from his previous service, adding that he'd rather others receive the new winter equipment. Heavy rain, snow, and falling temperatures are making conditions even grimmer along the front lines, where tens of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians are facing off as the war, now in its 10th month, grinds into winter. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akeredolu. I do have a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.